slapped a 94-year-old Marine in front of 15 Hells Angels. Everyone froze. The Oak Ridge Veterans Care Home sat quietly at the edge of town, its faded white walls holding stories of sacrifice, pain, and courage. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, the kind of mix that told you it was a place where people came to heal, but not to live forever. Among its residents was Henry Hank Lawson, a 94-year-old retired U.S. Marine, once a decorated war hero who had seen battles most people only read about. His medals, now tarnished with age, hung above his bed like silent witnesses to his past glory. But lately, Hank's days had been filled with more frustration than peace. The once proud Marine found himself depending on others for things he used to handle with ease. The nurses, most of them kind, treated him with respect. All except one, Nurse Dana Miller. Dana was in her late 30s, sharp-tongued, and carried herself with the arrogance of someone who thought a uniform gave her power. Her co-workers avoided confrontation, but the patients often whispered about her temper. She had a reputation for snapping at the elderly and belittling them when no supervisors were around. And this week, unfortunately, Hank had been assigned to her care. On a chilly Monday morning, the dining hall was filled with a quiet hum of conversation as veterans gathered for breakfast. Hank, wearing his old Marine cap, rolled in slowly on his wheelchair, saluting a few familiar faces. He always sat by the window, where sunlight streamed in, a reminder of freedom beyond the walls. Dana walked in briskly, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Lawson," she said sharply, "you're late again. You know breakfast starts at 7, not when you feel like it." Hank looked up at her, his deep blue eyes still holding a spark of the Marine he once was. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I may be old, but I fought for the right to take my time." The room fell silent. A few veterans chuckled softly, but Dana's face tightened. She hated being challenged. "You think this is some kind of joke?" she snapped. "You people think because you were soldiers once, you still get special treatment." Hank's jaw tightened. "We earned respect, young lady. That's not special treatment, that's basic decency." That did it. Dana's temper flared. She leaned closer, her voice low but venomous. "You're just an old man sitting in a chair. Nobody cares what you did 70 years ago." Before anyone could react, she slapped him, hard, across the face. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the hall. Plates clattered, and several veterans gasped. Hank's cap fell to the floor. His wrinkled cheek turned red instantly, but his eyes stayed calm, steady, and unbroken. And then came a sound that made Dana freeze. The front doors swung open, and the low rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot. 15 men in leather vests stepped into the building, boots thudding on the linoleum. On their backs, the words Hells Angels. Veteran Division glinted under the hallway lights. These weren't ordinary bikers. They were Marines, soldiers, and old friends of Hank. Every month, they rode down to visit him, the oldest living member of their veteran club. At the sight of Hank's reddened face, their smiles faded. The leader, a burly man with a grey beard named Reaper, clenched his fists. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice calm but deadly. Dana's face drained of colour. He was being rude," she stammered. Reaper looked at Hank, who simply nodded toward her, silent as ever. "You slapped a Marine," he said, stepping closer, his boots echoing with authority. "A 94-year-old war hero?" The veterans around the room stood, some shaky on their canes but fueled by anger. Dana tried to step back, but she was surrounded. 15 Hells Angels forming a wall of leather, scars, and loyalty. "Listen," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand." "Oh, we understand just fine," Reaper cut her off. "You think you can humiliate one of our own because he's old? You think his medals mean nothing?" He turned to the others. "Brothers, this place is about to get a lesson in respect." The staff began to gather near the hallway, whispering. The supervisor, drawn by the commotion, rushed in, but it was too late. The truth of what happened had already spread. Cameras were out. Phones were recording. Hank, still sitting quietly, finally spoke. "Don't hurt her," he said softly. "She already did that to herself." Reaper looked at him, then back at Dana. "You're lucky he's a better person than we are," he said. "But you'll answer for this." And with that, 15 leather-clad bikers turned the care home into the stage for justice that Dana would never forget. What happened next would go viral across the country, and it all began with that single shocking slap. Word of what happened spread through Oak Ridge Veterans Care Home like wildfire. Within an hour, staff whispered in corners, Patients leaned out of their rooms, and every nurse with a conscience refused to look Nurse Dana Miller in the eye. The slap that was meant to humiliate had instead exposed her cruelty to the entire building. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, the 15 Hells Angels, veteran division members, gathered around Hank Lawson. They parked their bikes like sentinels, the rumbling engines silenced now, but the fury in their eyes burned hotter than before. Reaper stood beside Hank's wheelchair, his tattooed hands clenched. "Brother," he said, "you just say the word. We'll make sure she never works another shift again." Hank looked up at him, his face calm but firm. "I don't want violence, Reaper, not in this place, but there's something I do want, respect and accountability." Reaper nodded slowly. He'd fought beside Hank's generation, men who believed in strength guided by honor. If Hank wanted justice, not chaos, that's what he'd get. "Then we'll give her a dose of both," he said, smirking. "Old-school Marine style." Inside, Dana sat in the nurse's station, shaking. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone, realizing multiple videos of the slap had already hit social media. The caption on one clip read, "Nurse assaults 94-year-old Marine. Hell's Angels witness it all." The comments were exploding. People demanded her arrest. Veterans groups began tagging the care home, calling for her termination. She tried to call the director's office, but no one answered. Even the receptionist, who usually smiled politely at her, avoided eye contact. Then, a deep, gravelly voice came from the doorway. "Dana Miller." She looked up. Reaper stood there, flanked by 2 other bikers, Tank and Ghost, their expressions unreadable. The scent of leather and motor oil filled the air. "This is a private area," she said nervously, forcing authority into her tone. "You can't be here." Reaper stepped closer, his boots echoing on the tile. "You made it public the moment you laid your hand on him." Dana tried to stand tall, but her knees were shaking. "You don't understand. He disrespected me." "Disrespected you?" Ghost growled. "That man fought for your freedom. He earned your respect long before you were even born." Reaper placed a thick envelope on the desk. "This," he said, "is a signed statement from every vet in this building. They're filing a formal complaint. You're done here." Dana's breath hitched. "You can't fire me." "Oh, we're not your employers," Reaper said with a cold smile. "We're just the messengers of karma." Just then, the facility's director, Margaret Turner, entered the station. Her face was pale and tight with fury. "Dana, my office, now." Dana followed, trembling, while the Hells Angels stood outside, arms crossed. Inside the office, Margaret didn't mince words. "I've watched the footage. You struck a resident, a decorated Marine no less. That's assault. You've been suspended, effective immediately. You can't suspend me over one mistake." Dana pleaded. "He provoked me." Margaret's tone turned icy. "You humiliated a war hero in front of witnesses. You didn't just cross a line, you destroyed your career." Outside the office, Reaper and the others waited with Hank. When the door finally opened, Dana walked out, her face red, eyes glassy. She froze when she saw them standing there. Every veteran in the hall turned to look at her. Reaper leaned in slightly. "You know, Dana, respect is a two-way street. You just learned that the hard way." Hank spoke softly, his voice steady but sharp. "When I was a Marine, we were taught something called honor under pressure. Maybe if you'd learned that, you'd have kept your hand to yourself." Dana bit her lip, but her pride still whispered lies in her head. "You think this makes you some kind of hero again? You're just an old man with friends who like to play biker." That was the wrong thing to say. From behind, one of the bikers, Tank, barked a laugh. "Lady, these friends built a network of veterans who feed the homeless, fund prosthetics for wounded soldiers, and rebuild homes for vets like Hank. What have you done lately, besides assault a hero?" Her face turned crimson. The walls of arrogance that had once protected her were cracking fast. Margaret gestured to security. "Escort her out." As Dana was led toward the exit, she turned once more to look back at Hank. But what she saw wasn't weakness, it was calm authority. His back was straight, eyes bright, dignity fully intact. When the door shut behind her, the hall erupted in applause. Nurses, veterans, and even janitors clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Hank simply smiled faintly, saluted his friends, and whispered, "Semper Fit." Reaper put a hand on his shoulder. "We're not done yet, old man," he said. "We're making sure the world knows what she did, and what you stood for." By evening, news vans lined up outside Oak Ridge. The footage of the slap was already on major channels, the headline bold across every screen, 94-year-old Marine assaulted by nurse. Hell's Angels step in for justice. And as the sun set behind the veteran's home, Dana's world began to crumble, because justice had only just started. By morning, the video had exploded across the internet. News outlets, veterans groups, and millions of angry citizens were reposting it under one shared message: respect our heroes. Clips of Dana Miller's slap played on every major network, her face frozen in mid-action, a symbol of arrogance and cruelty. Her name trended on social media, and by sunrise, people were camping outside her apartment, journalists knocking at her door, demanding answers. At the Oak Ridge Veterans Care Home, Hank Lawson woke up to find his room filled with flowers, flags, and handwritten letters. Messages from Marines, soldiers, and citizens poured in. Some came from as far as Japan and Germany. The world had found a new hero, not in Hank's medals, but in his dignity. The Hell's Angels, Reaper, Tank, Ghost, and the rest stood guard in the courtyard, keeping reporters back. They weren't there for fame. They were there for Hank, their brother. Reaper sat beside Hank, sipping black coffee. "You realize you broke the internet, old man," he said with a grin. Hank chuckled softly. "Didn't mean to. I just wanted a quiet breakfast." "Yeah, well," Reaper said, patting his shoulder, "you ended up teaching the world a lesson instead." Inside the facility, Director Margaret Turner had spent the entire night managing calls from media outlets and government officials. "We've had senators calling, news anchors, even the governor's office," she told Hank later. "They all want to meet you." Hank waved a hand dismissively. "All I want is for these men and women here to be treated right, not as burdens, but as people who gave everything they had." Margaret nodded, deeply moved. "You've done more for this care home in 24 hours than we have in years." Meanwhile, Dana was living through her own storm. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, threats, insults, even her own family cutting contact. Her mother had called only once, her voice heavy with shame. "Dana, how could you? He's a Marine. You slapped a war hero on camera." "I made a mistake," Dana had shouted back. "I didn't mean—" But no one was listening anymore. Her nursing license was under review, her apartment vandalized with spray paint that read, "Respect our vets," and every clinic in town had publicly stated she'd never work for them. In a last attempt to save herself, she called a lawyer, but after seeing the footage, he refused to represent her. "This isn't just bad press," he said bluntly. "It's career suicide." That afternoon, the Hell's Angels organized a small ceremony at Oak Ridge. They wanted to honor Hank, not for what had happened, but for how he handled it, with restraint and pride. The courtyard was packed. Veterans in wheelchairs lined the front row, waving flags. Local media set up cameras. Reaper stepped to the podium, his voice deep and commanding. Yesterday, this man was disrespected, but instead of anger, he showed honor. That's what being a Marine means. That's what being a man means. The crowd erupted in applause. Hank was handed a folded American flag by two young Marines in uniform. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. "I didn't want revenge," he said into the microphone. "I just wanted decency. If what happened to me makes people remember what respect looks like, then maybe it was worth the slap." Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. But the image that captured everyone's heart was this: a 94-year-old Marine sitting in his wheelchair, saluting as the Hell's Angels stood behind him in silent formation, helmets tucked under their arms. By evening, that photo went viral. It was printed on the front page of every major newspaper under the headline, "The Marine Who Stood Tall, Even After the Slap." But for Dana, the walls were closing in. A local news crew caught her outside a grocery store. "Ms. Miller, do you have any comment about what happened at Oak Ridge?" Her voice broke as she tried to respond. I just lost control for a second. I didn't mean to hurt him." The reporter's eyes narrowed. "Do you regret it?" Dana hesitated, and that hesitation sealed her fate. The camera zoomed in on her tear-streaked face as she whispered, "I regret getting caught." Within minutes, the clip was online, and the public erupted again, angrier than ever. Her insincerity turned the tide completely against her. At Oak Ridge, Reaper watched the clip on his phone and shook his head. "She still doesn't get it." Hank looked out the window at the sunset. "Some people never will," he said quietly. "But that's not our burden to carry." Reaper smiled. "No, but we'll make sure the world remembers yours." That night, a retired Marine general visited the care home. He knelt beside Hank's bed, his voice filled with reverence. "You reminded America what true discipline looks like, soldier." Hank smiled faintly. Just doing what I was trained to do, sir. Stand tall even when it hurts. The general saluted him. Then stand tall you did, Marine. And as the lights dimmed and the Hell's Angels rolled out into the night, their engines roaring like a salute of thunder, the world began to see Hank Lawson not as a victim, but as a symbol. For Dana Miller, however, the storm was far from over, because justice was not done yet, and someone powerful was about to make sure she faced the full consequences. The days following the viral video turned into weeks of national uproar. Everywhere, from veteran organizations to talk shows, people spoke about Henry Hank Lawson, the 94-year-old Marine who had been slapped yet never raised his voice. His quiet dignity struck a chord across America. Veterans saluted his photo at parades. Children in schools wrote essays about him. Meanwhile, Dana Miller found herself living in isolation. Her nursing license had been permanently revoked. Her face had become a meme symbolizing cruelty. Every job interview ended the same way. Polite smiles that vanished once her name was searched online. Her reputation was beyond repair. But what she didn't know was that Hank's story was about to go even bigger. One morning, a black SUV rolled up to the Oak Ridge Veterans Care Home. Out stepped Colonel Raymond Steele, commander of the State Veterans Affairs Division. Cameras followed him as he made his way to Hank's room. "Mr. Lawson," he said, standing tall, "on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and the United States Marine Corps, we're here to honor your lifelong service and your extraordinary example of courage, even off the battlefield." Hank, wearing his Marine cap, looked surprised. "I'm just a man who wanted breakfast," he said humbly. The colonel smiled. "And you reminded a nation what respect looks like. That deserves recognition." A hush fell over the room as the colonel placed a medal on Hank's chest, a medal of civil valor, awarded for inspiring acts of integrity. The Hell's Angels stood behind him, their vests gleaming under the lights. Reporters snapped pictures. It was a moment that captured the strength of humanity, quiet, dignified, unyielding. Across town, Dana watched the ceremony on TV. She sat alone in a half-empty apartment, surrounded by unopened eviction notices. Her phone buzzed with notifications, but none were messages of support, only more reminders of the damage she'd done. As the reporter spoke Hank's name, she whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I just lost control." But the truth hit her like a wave. She hadn't just lost control. She had lost her soul to pride. That evening, Hank sat outside in the courtyard under the setting sun. Reaper and a few of his brothers joined him, passing around mugs of coffee. "You think she'll ever apologize?" Tank asked quietly. Hank exhaled, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe, but an apology doesn't fix character. It just proves someone learned what pain feels like." Reaper nodded. "She's feeling it now. Karma hit her harder than any of us could." Just then a car pulled into the parking lot. To everyone's surprise, Dana Miller stepped out. Her once pristine uniform replaced with plain jeans and a sweater. Her eyes were red, her posture defeated. The courtyard went silent. Reaper stood up immediately, fists clenching, but Hank raised a hand. "Let her come." Dana approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. She stopped a few feet away from Hank, her voice trembling. "Mr. Lawson, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I came to say I'm sorry." Hank looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the arrogant nurse anymore. She was broken, humbled. "You hurt more than just me," Hank said quietly. "You disrespected everyone who ever wore this uniform. But owning up to it, that takes courage too." Dana's eyes filled with tears. "I've lost everything, my job, my home, my friends. I wish I could undo it." "You can't," Hank said softly. "But you can start by doing something right." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small paper, the address of a volunteer center for disabled veterans. "Go help there," he said. "No paycheck, no applause. Just service. That's how you'll find yourself again." Dana stared at the paper, then at him, speechless. "After everything I did, why would you give me that chance?" Hank smiled faintly. "Because revenge ends things. Forgiveness changes them." The Hell's Angels watched in silence. Reaper stepped forward, nodding in respect. "You're one hell of a man, Hank." As Dana turned to leave, Reaper spoke up, his voice low but firm. "You hurt one of ours, lady, but he's giving you mercy. Don't waste it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I won't." Weeks passed, and true to her word, Dana began volunteering. She cleaned wheelchairs, served food, and cared for veterans without expecting thanks. Slowly, the same people who once despised her began to see a change, not perfection but repentance. Back at Oak Ridge, Hank's health began to fade, but his spirit never did. The care home renamed the courtyard Lawson's Honor Garden, placing a bronze plaque that read, "He taught us that strength isn't in fists, it's in restraint." Months later, during a memorial ceremony after Hank peacefully passed away, hundreds gathered, veterans, bikers, nurses, even Dana. She stood quietly in the back, placing a single white rose near his photograph. Reaper took the podium, his voice steady but emotional. He fought wars overseas, and then taught us how to fight the war within ourselves. Rest easy, brother. You're relieved of duty. The crowd saluted as a formation of Hell's Angels revved their engines in a final thunderous tribute echoing across the town. As the roar faded, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, falling directly on Hank's picture. And in that light, bright, warm and defiant, the old Marine stood tall once more.